to make this bag, we're going to use the sock loom 2, and I like this loom because this is what I use for preemie hats and that, and you can adjust this part if you wanted to, but we're going to end up using all the pegs on it. And I'm using 2 different yarns. I've got a solid color dark green right here, and then I've got a very heavy kind of strap. You could try to add one in later if you wanted. I wanted more like a little handheld bag. So we're going to cast on half the peg. So again, if you're looking at it, we're going to start at the halfway point on each one, and we're just going to cast on these pegs with a simple E-wrap cast on. So we're going to go, and I'm going to actually use my variegated yarn first. Let me just get it out here. And again, just a simple E-wrap. Keep it very kind of easy to do here. So you're just going to do your little slip knot. And again, we're going to do half the pegs that are on the loom. We're going to come over here. And then we're just going to simply wrap until we get to that same point on the other side. The flap is going to be done in this variegated yarn, as I said, and then when we're ready to use the solid, I will let you know. But again, we're just de-wrapping half the peg, so we're going over. Oh my goodness. To the third peg on the side, okay. So see, we got half the pegs. We're going to do the E-wrap cast on, so I got to work my way back here, so I'm going to push these out of my way so that I can wrap my way back. And now you're just going to simply wrap your way back to the other side. Now you can choose to make it easier, so if you're like me and you're kind of stumbling with the wrapping, you can choose as you go to just simply lock it into place by knitting it over. And then continue again to get to the other side. Okay, we're on our last few pegs here for our cast on, and go ahead and knit them over. Now the tail you have going through from that, you can hide that in the project later. What we're actually going to do now is we're going to work the garter stitch for a little bit, because we want this to not curl up as much on the flap. So again, we've already done a cast on row. We're going to count that as our first row with knitting, and now we need to do the purl stitch. Again, remember, garter is where you alter a knit a row, a knit a purl, then back to a knit row, and then back to a purl row, and you can repeat that as many times as you need for your project. But again, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to purl this back over to that way. And again, if we're purling, we're just going down through the loop. Make sure the camera is focused here. We're just going to go through the loop, grab our working yarn, pull it up through to create our new loop right here, and we take that off and we place it back on. Give it a slight tug, move on to the next, work your way down into the loop, grab your working yarn, turn it, and pull it up. And I apologize if you can hear the fan in the background. It was just too warm not to have something running when I'm filming tonight, so I apologize for that. So again, you're going to work your way all the way to the other end, and all you're doing is simply working your looming tool down through the loop, grabbing your working yarn, pulling it up, and purling it. So go ahead and do this to the end of the row. Okay, we're getting back to the end on this side. Just a few more pegs to do. Okay, now what we're going to do here for the knitting row back, you can choose to do an E-wrap knit, you can choose to do a classic knit or the U-knit. So I mean, there's a lot of different choices between flat, U, and E-wrap along with the true. So I mean, it's just a matter of which one you want to do. But for this pattern that I'm doing, we're going to actually do the flat knit instead of doing, the normal E-wrap that I a lot of times do. Now remember, with the flat knit, you're just laying the working yarn on top of the pegs, and then you're knitting over. Let me try that again. Get back over here. Okay, so it's on top of the pegs. Okay, and then you're just going to knit the bottom or the top. And you're just laying it on top of the pegs. Don't pull it really, really tight, because that'll make your tension a little harder when you do the purl row. Just kind of put it across a couple pegs at a time, and just take the bottom and knit it over. I did it again. Tell you, it's been a few days without filming, so my fingers don't want to work right. And again, when I'm doing this, I'm normally going to be, at a different angle than holding it like I am for the camera. So you knit over. Again, you're just laying it in front of the yarn. Ready to turn. Make sure you get that row done. And that's all you're going to do this time, is you're laying, the working yarn across the pegs with a flat knit, taking the bottom loop, knitting it over the top. Okay, moving on to the next, knitting it over. So continue this all the way to the other side. Okay, we got the last couple pegs over on this side. Again with the flat knit. So I'm just doing the last two over here. Okay. Now we still need to alternate knitting and purling, but again, our knit is going to be the flat knit. Okay, so that's completing the row of knit. We did the flat knit. Now we need to do the row of purl again. And what we're going to do is I'm going to count doing one row of purl and one row of knit as one set. So I'm counting that as a set. You're going to repeat this many sets of doing one row of knit, one row of purl, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next part. So again, remember, your knit row is going to be done in the flat knit like we just did. After completing 5 sets of where you alternated between purling and using the flat knit, you should end up having it look like this. We got just a little bit of the flap actually coming through. Now we're still working the flap right now. We're not ready to incorporate the rest of the bag, but I just wanted to give you a look on how it's looking on the both sides. We did it's basically the garter stitch. We get a little nicer view. And now what I want to do is, I actually really like using the figure 8 stitch, and I want to do just a little bit of figure 8 on the flap before we go back doing the garter stitch. So remember, with the figure 8, you're taking your yarn out from the back, from one peg, and you're wrapping the next and wrapping it back around, so you end up having loops on both pegs there, and then you're just knitting over. Again, making sure you take the bottom loop over the top. And again, for the next part, it's coming off of that peg. You're going to come over, wrap around, and go behind the first one, bring it to the front, wrap around. Again, this is the figure 8 stitch. And knit over. And again, when you get to the corner, you're going to come over to the corner one, wrap it, go behind the first one there, wrap it, and then knit over. Now if it's a little snug knitting over, remember you would have ended on a flat knit, so if it is a little tough, it might have just been that you did the flat knit a little too hard. So again, now we've got our yarn. We're going to come around to this one, in between those two, behind the first one you did, coming around like that. And you're going to continue doing the figure 8 stitch for that many rows right there, and then we will come back and we will go back to doing the garter. After completing 10 sets of doing the garter stitch again, which again we were using the flat knit on our knit rows and then purling, you should have a flap that comes out of your loom like this. This will be the flap of the bag. Now we have to incorporate all the pegs in the project now. So we want to be able to go around to close this off so that it'll be the bag. So we want to use all the pegs. And how we're going to do that is we're going to continue going the same way we did before. And we're going to go all the way around and we're going to wrap all the pegs. So we're going to end up doing a row of E-wrap knit along the front, and then we're going to wrap these pegs along the back. So it's going to be a simple process. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the pegs, okay, as we go around. And if you want to, at the same time, you can go ahead and knit these over as you're working if you want, so that you don't have to worry about them coming undone. Just go ahead and do like an E-wrap knit going around. Again, just wrap all the pegs so you can E-wrap knit the front, and then you'll be wrapping the back separately. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to work over till I get to this part over here, and I'm going to E-wrap knit this. So I'll meet you back here when we go ahead to do the back side. When you get back here, when you go to the empty pegs, we're just going to go ahead and wrap them. We're just going to end up doing a row of E-wrap knit all the way around the loom. Wrapping these empty pegs. When you get to the start, go ahead and go over to the start peg that we had before. And once you're here, I want you to go ahead and knit this over to lock it in place. Now continue going around the loom, and this time we're going to keep doing, I know I said E-wrap knit, but I want to switch it over to the flat knit. You're going to go ahead and you're going to flat knit all the pegs around the loom, all the way around. Do the flat knit until you come back to the start point right here. Once you've done that, you'll see that all the pegs have now been casted on, and we can now make the main part of the bag. Now what I want to do, just because this is going to be the top of the opening, I want to kind of do the garter stitch again, just to kind of help with the curling that may happen up at the bag before we switch colors and switch our stitch pattern. So we had already did a flat knit row, but now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the purl row. Excuse me. And after the purl row, we'll go back to using the flat knit and then back to the purl. And we're going to do the garter stitch sets, again, a set being one row of flat knit, one row of purl, for this many sets right here. And then we'll come back and we'll add in the second color. We'll switch this color out to our other color and do another stitch pattern for the base of the bag. So go ahead again and you're going to do a purl row right now, and then you're going to switch over to doing the garter stitch sets like we did before for this many sets. After completing those 4 sets, we're going to have your project looking like this. We got our nice little the flap here, and then we've got the going around part. So again, when you're looking at it coming through the bottom, you've got your flap. You're just starting to see the bag come through here. Now what we want to do is I want to change it over to the solid green color. And what we're going to do there is it's going to be a simple, I usually just simply tie the new to the old. So you're going to cut yourself a little bit of a tail. You want to cut it and tie it as close to the peg as you can. So I'm going to cut my current tail, remove that one. I'm getting a little tangled back here. You can't see that I'm getting tangled, but it's kind of funny. Now you're going to take these 2 and you're just going to simply tie them together. There's other methods you can do. This is just the method that I usually choose to do. And then go ahead and give it a good knot. And tie it tight. You want to make sure that it's not going to pull apart. So again, just give it a good knot. You can even do a second knot if you choose to. And you can always weave in these ends later when you're done with the bag. And just tuck them out of your way and then weave them into the project when you're all done. Now the other thing you want to do here is we're going to move on to the main part of the bag. And in this stitch it's going to be taken a little bit from my inspired link stitch video that I have, in which we're going to purl a peg, slip a peg, purl a peg, slip a peg, working around the loom once, and then the second row of that set is going around just doing the flat knit around the whole peg, or the whole loom, sorry. So again, we're going to do the inspired link stitch, which is taken from my video, kind of a little bit like a knit stitch that I tried to convert to the loom, and I really like the look of it, and I really wanted to see how it looked in a bag. So for that, you just simply need to, again, you got your tails here, you're going to move them out of your way. You're going to purl the first peg. Now I have the stitch marker here because this is my starting point. This is where I started the project completely. This lets me know when I'm going in around. So you can go ahead, I know I didn't mention it at the beginning of the video, but you can go ahead and add a stitch marker if you want, in order to make it easier for you to know where your starting point was. And again, we're going to be alternating between purling and slipping stitches, so again, make sure you have no distractions, or if you need to, you can try to place stitch markers around so that you know what you're doing on what peg. So again, the first stitch is we're going to, first row of it, we purl. Okay, and again, you're going to hide these tails after you're done. And this next we're going to slip to slip it. I'm going to hopefully get a good view here. We're going to take the yarn behind the peg and come back in front to the next one that we want to purl. And go ahead and purl it. Okay, now we're going over to this peg. We have to skip this peg, so we're going to keep the yarn behind that peg. It needs to be our slipped one. Come in front to the next peg that we need to purl. So again, we're slipping the next one. It's just going behind the yarn, or behind the peg. Come in front again to the next one. Again, slip behind the next peg, bring it in front to the next one that you're going to purl. And what I like about the stitch is a two-row process, which makes it nice. I'll purl it, put it on there. Again, go ahead and slip the next one by going behind it, bringing it around to the next peg that you want to purl. Continue this until you get back to your starting point, and then we'll do the next row of the stitch. Now, once you get back to your starting peg, we've already slipped that last peg was slipped, so bring it around front. We're getting ready to start just our flat knit row. And again, I want to make sure, I know I might have mentioned this before, but when you're doing the flat knit, don't pull this yarn tight. It'll make it really hard to knit over or purl for the next one. Keep it just a little loose, just a little bit of slack. It'll make it a little easier for you on the next turn of doing your next stitch or next row if you're not pulling it too tight. So don't pull it tight. You want to have a little bit of give to it to make it easier for knitting over. Now I'm holding this at a weird angle, so it may be hard to do, but again, we're going to do the flat knit for this. And I'm just going to lay it across a couple, and then I'm just going to simply go in, and I'm just going to knit it over. With doing the purl on the other row, it does help with flexibility, but again, just go ahead. Okay, so really not this hard. I'm just holding this at a weird angle, so I can't get over as easily. It's a lot more easier when you're holding it yourself. Again, you're just going to do a flat knit around the loom, holding your yarn in front, and then just again taking the bottom over the top for your flat knit row of the link stitch. So now what you're going to do is you're going to complete these 2 rows. They're going to be counted as a set, just like we did with the garter. So the first row, you're purling a peg and then slipping a peg. The next row, you're doing the flat knit all the way across. So count those as a set. Those are the 2 rows you're going to do. And you're going to complete that set this many times, and then we'll come back for the next part. So again, you're going to do 1 row of the purling a peg, slipping a peg with a working yarn and back, and then you're going to do a flat knit row for that many sets. After completing the 35 sets of doing the inspired link stitch, your product should be coming out nicely through the small loom. Again, this is our flap and this is the main part. Now what you're going to do too is once it's off the loom, and even while it's on, you're going to kind of give this area a little stretch every now and then just to make the stitch come through a little more. And I really like the way it looks. And if you do notice, there's a minor error I did right here. I accidentally did the wrong row during that, but I didn't know till I was past it, so I decided not to go back and frog it. But you can't really notice it unless you're really looking for it. So again, this is the bag sticking out, and we've got our flap that's going to go over. And again, this is a small bag, so we just now what I want to do is I want to loosen up some of these stitches from doing the flat knit, because that is usually a tighter stitch. So we're going to go ahead, and all you're going to do now is for this many rows, you're just going to E-wrap knit, and this will help loosen up the stitches before we bind this off. So again, remember with E-wrap is you're just simply wrapping a peg and you're knitting it over. That's all E-wrap is. So you're just going to go ahead and you're just going to work around the loom again for this many rows in E-wrap, and then we'll be ready to take this off the loom. After completing 3 rows of E-wrap knit, we're ready to take this off the loom. What we're going to do is a gathered bind off. So you're going to end up having your tail here, so you're going to cut a little extra off the working tail. Leave yourself probably about 7 or 8 inches. Now go ahead and create another piece of string, again about 12 inches or so. You want to make sure you have enough, so anywhere from 12 inches to even 24 inches, somewhere in there, to make sure you have enough to go around. Now what you're going to do is the simple gathered bind off. So we're going to have our working yarn, we got our tail, it's already on the loom, and we got our working yarn. Just going to hold it up against here, excuse me, and you're just going to go ahead and you're going to work around taking the new tail that you have, going through the loop that's on the peg, grabbing that tail, that new yarn we have, pull it through, pull all the way through. And you're going to work around the loom doing that same thing. You're going to, and watching that you don't pull it all the way through, because you want to make sure you have these 2 kind of right here. So you're just going to move over to the next one, do the same thing, pull it all the way through. Go to the next, and again, pull it all the way through. Now, after you work a few of them, you can go back and you could take the loops off the pegs, the ones that you've done that too, as you're going around. So go ahead and keep doing this process of pulling it through, keeping an eye on it at the start so you don't pull the string all the way through. And you're going to go ahead and go around the whole loom, and I'll meet you back here on the other side. We're on our last 2 pegs that we've got to do the working yarn through. Okay, and then go ahead and remove these last 2 loops off the pegs. Now what you're going to do is, because this is the outside of it, I want to turn this inside out so that we're binding it off on the inside. And then just like a hat, we're just going to pull these close. So as you're gently pulling them, it's going to close off the bag. It's going to be a little hard to see because of the color, but what you can do is you're looking at it almost like a hat. We still got some gap here, and this is where I usually take a crochet hook and I would go in and I would bind that off. It's going to be a little hard to show with the colors, so I apologize for that. But you're just going to keep pulling your strands, not too tight, until they stop closing up as much as they can. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use a crochet hook. I'm going to go in here as best we can to show you that you would go ahead and you would find where the other opening is, and you would put your yarn, or your tool into the other side where there's a gap. I would put it into one stitch over here. I would grab one of my working yarns, and then I would pull it through, and then I would take these two strands back up here, and I would tie them closed. Now again, with using the dark yarn, I understand it's a little hard to see, but I've done this method on others, and you can also look up like a gathered bind off. That's pretty much what this is. And again, you would just kind of go ahead and you would tie it, the bag, even closed more. And you can easily check it by putting your hands inside and going on the inside, and you can see that there's still some holes, so you're going to keep working the yarn back and forth to create this to make this opening closed, just like you've done in other hats. So you would take your crochet hook and you would go into another stitch on the opposite side. You'd find a stitch, just one little stitch that you can put on there, grab your, some of your working tail that you had left over, pull it through there, and then again you would tie it off. And you keep doing that until this opening is closed off. Again, you can easily check by putting your finger. You can see where the next part is that you may need to close off, and you would just go down in there, put your crochet hook through another stitch on the opposite side, and then you would grab the nearest working yarn and pull it through and tie it off. So then you would continue doing that until the whole project is bound off, and then you would cut your extra working tail that you don't need anymore and turn this back the way you had it, and then you got your cute little flap here of the bag, and it makes a nice little cute bag for just a little clutchy type bag. That's what I wanted to do. And then if you wanted to, you can go ahead and add some sort of button to keep it closed. I haven't decided. You'll see in the beginning picture which button I chose, but you can add a button, and you can add just a little piece of yarn on the flap so that it can actually close the button off. So you would just decide you don't need any button, because like I said, you would stretch it out a little bit from that stitch we did before. You just kind of give it a stretch. I mean, there's other bind offs you could do, but I wanted a little like a pouch type one. And you just kind of would work it to get it the way you want. And again, we'd have our nice little bag. So if I wanted to add a button, I would go ahead and I would pick out, I had plenty of, the button I'd want to put. And what I would do is I would work in this tail that's left over from the beginning. You would kind of work that into the underside of this flap so that nobody would see it. You would just weave in your ends over here, and then you could just trim it when you needed to after you worked it over. Once you get that woved in, again, you would decide if you want a button, and then you could always take an extra piece of the yarn that you have. And what you would do is you flip over your project, you'd use your crochet hook, bring this loop in, go on the opposite side. Okay, we're going to go on the opposite side. You can see what I'm doing here. I know it's a little blurry. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to go in and pick a loop over here. I'm kind of trying to line it up in the middle. So when I'm looking at the flap, I'm kind of trying to decide whereabouts the middle of the flap is. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to work this tail in. And so we'd have the spot, and I'd be like, okay, that's going to line up where I want for the button, and then we're just going to go ahead. I'm going to tie this off. Tie it right onto there so that we have our nice little button hole. Give it an extra little knot. And then when we flip this down, we have our nice little loop for our button. Now we need to figure out which button we want to do. When you find out which button, you would find one that would fit in the loop. Like this one may not fit all the way around, so I wouldn't use that one. I'm going to find the smaller button I was going to use, and I'll show you how to attach that. Once you find the button that you want to use, I'm going to use this nice little button here. First thing you can do is cut the tails off of your buttonhole. Then you need to figure out whereabouts you're going to need to place your button. I'm thinking when you're looking at the bag, you can decide how tight down you want to do it. I'm shooting for right about there, and I just need to work some yarn through the buttonholes and then sew your button where you want it, and then you'll be able to just simply attach it through. So again, decide how big of a loop you need for the button you're going to do, and then you're just going to want to decide where you want to place the button. Just sew it into the yarn, and then you'll be good to go. So I'm going to sew this button on where I want to place it, and I'll show you it all done. Okay, I sewed the button on where I wanted it placed, and then I've got my little loop so that it can be undone and used. So you're just going to sew your button on where you want it, and depending on how tight you want it to go down. And then we have a nice cute little handbag. If you wanted to add a strap, you'd have to do a separate part and add it on to it, but I just wanted this to be one that you could carry in your hand, and it's very lightweight. I will take some measurements to give you an idea of how long and wide it actually is, and I will put that right there for you. I'll do how far it is across and how far it is down to give you an idea of what you'll end up with. And you can easily adjust it by adding more of the link stitch in before you bind it off, and you can even try doing other bind offs if you want a different look. So I hope you like it, and have a great day, everyone.